Well, journalists will look at the debate on that request for extension of emergency in those three northern states, northeast states, is Major General Muyiwa Badewole. He's retired, and well, he was the former Director of Army Legal Services and the former Registrar of the NDA. Well, we'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. I'm so excited knowing full well that, well, you're a lawyer then.
Yes.
Good. So perhaps we can talk from the point of law. This request, before the request, let's look at what we have been doing in Nigeria's northeast. By now we thought we should have been able to, well, wriggle ourselves out of this emergency situation and get to a very comfortable situation whereby we can say, well, we wouldn't be needing an extension. Recall that the Nigerian Army, your constituency, they were making significant progress before we stopped concerning some kind of talks between us and the insurgents. You're retired, you're not in-house, but what do you think went wrong if we were getting somewhere and all of a sudden we stopped and we were taken aback when there was renewed violence in that particular part of the country?
Well, thank you very much for having me in your studio. And I probably want to start by saying that insurgency, just as rebellion or insurrection, is a species of low-intensity conflict. And in combating low-intensity conflict, one of the cardinal principles is perseverance, both on the part of the troops, on the part of the populace, and on the part of the political elite. We need to persevere.
Everyone.
Everyone needs to persevere. It doesn't end quickly. Low-intensity conflict has never ended quickly in any part of the world where it has happened. And from what we are having now, we are even moving from low-intensity conflict to medium-intensity conflict. And I think the earlier we get it right, that this operation may not end so quickly, the better for all of us, because we are not in the minds of the perpetrators of this dastardly act, that is the Boko Haram. We don't know exactly what they want. And look at what is happening in places like Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Those situations have never been brought to a conclusive end. And I think we must give it to the armed forces that they are trying their best within the resources available to confront and to bring this insurgency situation under serious control.
Do you think sorry, Marco, do you think they're experiencing any form of handicap in the discharge or carrying out operations in the northeast? Because some would say, well, whether you get the extension or not, well, it doesn't stop the president from deploying troops to troubled regions like the armed forces.
Well, again, let me say that when you look at military capability, in the words of Sun Tzu, there are three elements that make up military capability: the conceptual component, the physical component, and the moral component. Where any one of these elements is missing, then the war fighting ethos we are looking for, you may not get it. Don't forget that Mr. President forwarded a request to the National Assembly asking for $1 billion to procure weapons and logistics to enable the military carry out these operations. So in terms of, what do we call it now? Emergency rule. I mean, I also want to let you know that in so many countries where state of emergency has been declared, like in India, when during the Indo-Chinese conflict, state of emergency was in place from 1961 to 1967. Similarly, from when they had the Indo-Pakistani war, there was a state of emergency for another 6 years. And between 1975 to 1977, under Indira Gandhi, there was state of emergency. So here we've had just state of emergency for 18 months, and everybody is fretting and getting worried. I mean, it's for us to say, oh, let's put a lead and say the operation will come to a conclusive end at a particular time. I do not share that view.
Well, that's also because, maybe that's because the army's been giving us, or the military has been giving us reason to hope. We do recall that it was the last year, sometime, when the service chiefs were appointed, and we got wind of the fact that the operations could be over in as little as 6 months. It looked like all they had to do was, put a lead on certain things. But from what you've explained now, you say that it's a low-intensity conflict and could drag on for a while.
Yes.
That we must persevere in these areas.
Yes.
It would seem that it also makes the argument of those who are against the continuation of the state of emergency, which they say, we don't know how long it's going to last, we don't know how effective this has been. Can we begin to measure just how effective a state of emergency has been and say, these are the results that we're looking for if it continues?
My answer to that question would be that what will happen if there was no state of emergency? Even with the state of emergency, the Boko Haram is running riot, ransacking villages, and killing people.
What does the state of emergency help us do? Perhaps we should start from there.
Well, if you look at Section 305 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, you probably will see the situation where the president can invoke a state of emergency. Particularly, the procedure is contained in Section 305, subsection 1 and 2. And then in subsection 3, it detailed out circumstances in which state of emergency can be invoked. The first thing is that if the country is in a state of war, or if law and order had broken down, state of emergency can be invoked. Also, in situation of national emergency, state of emergency can be invoked. But this particular situation, those who are calling for the cessation of the emergency rule are not looking at it objectively, because in a state of emergency situation, some of the fundamental rights as guaranteed under the Constitution are suspended to enable the troops to operate effectively. Take, for instance, you got an intelligence report that ammunition has been stocked in a particular house. Ordinarily, without a state of emergency, you need to go to court to obtain a search warrant before you can go to that house. But under a state of emergency, information comes to you, you must capitalize on it and move in quickly before the perpetrators disappear into thin air. And of course, we are looking at asymmetric warfare. We are fighting an unknown enemy. In conventional warfare, the Nigerian Army or the Nigerian forces would have been able to bring this thing to a conclusive end. Just yesterday, we had 2 suicide bombers, female suicide bombers in Maiduguri, leading to the dying of about 33 civilians. Who would have imagined that young ladies going to the market had been wired up in that manner, leading to the death of so many people?
But that is still happening. I mean, they'll say that even under the state of emergency, that's what's happening. So what will change if we continue to extend the state of emergency?
Well, I have explained to you that if we don't have state of emergency, the situation will be worse. I admit that the president can deploy troops. I mean, operational use of the armed forces is there for him. But at the same time, I've just told you that there are certain privileges that will hinder the operation. You need to carry out cordon and search operations. You need to mount roadblocks. But these are things that people can go and challenge and say, oh, you are impinging on my right. But some fundamental rights under the Constitution are suspended, as I said to you, in a state of emergency.
If I may come in here.
Yes, please.
The complaints that those that are against an extension of the state of emergency have brought forth include the fact that the insurgents appear to have free way of movement. I mean, they move freely while the citizens are restricted. And they think that that is not helping the situation. Have you looked at it from that angle?
Do you really think they are being objective? Because a couple of years ago, we were having sporadic attack in Kano, in Kaduna, in Bauchi, in so many areas of the north, not only the northeast. But now, the insurgents have been contained in that particular area. And of course, as I said to you, if we didn't have a state of emergency, the situation would have been worse than what we have now.
Let us also talk. Let's talk about that. I mean, we've been saying that we've been able to contain the insurgents to a certain part of the country. Well, we've also seen even within that period there were attacks in Kano. In that period as well. We also saw that, within the area that the troops were, we were also losing territories, in spite of the fact that we did have a state of emergency declared. We were still in this state of emergency that girls were kidnapped. Can we begin to say that it has really, really worked?
Well, to my mind, and from the information available in the public domain, state of emergency has actually worked. Forget about the politics of it.
What is the politics of it?
Yeah, the politics of it, a lot of people believe that if you give an extension now, it will go beyond the February 2015 general elections. That is my view. So some people believe that if you impose state of emergency, it will create problems. But to my mind, it's not going to create any problem. And I'm happy that yesterday the service chiefs were in the National Assembly to make their case known to the National Assembly members. And I do believe that, you see, you have to also look at decision-making process. The president does just not wake up and say, I want to declare state of emergency. There's a Defense and Security Council that normally advise Mr. President on such issues. And before now, you will recall that when you have the kind of situation, the service chiefs will brief the Defense Council. Members of the Defense Council will brief the National Security Council. And the National Security Council will now advise Mr. President on the need to take certain actions. So the decision-making process is such that needs to be looked at, that in the wisdom of those that are calling for an extension, what have they done? And I want to say that they've subjected it to a lot of tests. And as I said to you, look at other countries where we've had a state of emergency declared when the peace and security of a state is threatened. So in this particular case, if the peace and security of the northern state, law and order has broken down in those areas, and you now say, oh, let's not declare a state of emergency, what is the alternative? What is the alternative to a state of emergency?